Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem, welcome back to today's Daf Yomi Beya Lamed. We begin a new parak starting from the Mishnah on Chaf Tesamad Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. It says the Mishnah, maybe Kade Yain, Mimakim Lamakim. He has a couple of pitchers, containers of wine. He'd like to transport them from place to place. How does he go about doing that? It says the Mishnah, Lo Yeviem, B'sal u B'kupa. Rather than taking a whole bunch of these containers, filling a sal, a kupa, a basket, a box, and transporting them in this manner. Don't do that, because it appears like a ma'as choy, like he's engaged in delivering and transporting. He's making a public spectacle on Yom Tov. He meant to keep things subdued and low-keyed when it comes to Yom Tov. Aval, rather, maybe who el kseifa should take 1 or 2 and place them on his shoulders, or hold it in front of him. Likewise, when he's transporting some hay, rather than filling the sack and slinging over his back, don't do that. Rather, he should bring it holding it in his hands. Let's go over to Rashi, 11 lines from the bottom of the Yamid. So we're not speaking about taking something out of the tchum. He's carrying from a closed area something within the tchum, or there's an eruv which allows him to do that, an eruv, a tchumen this is. So the actual carrying is not a concern, but the spectacle is. Lo yiviem b'sala b'kupa lases shalish v'arba b'sech kupa v'yisoim. Should not place 3 or 4 inside the box and carry them in this manner. Mishum denirke maseh choil lases masois. It looks like he's delivering and transporting, which has a weekday ring to it. Aval maybe al ksefay achas yishtayim on his shoulder. That's okay. The muchach tzerich yantiv. It appears like it's just for today, for immediate yamtiv use. Oil fanav biyada in his hands. V'chenem lochsateven lahasig al behema for fuel or for animal feed. Lo yavshel kupa la'achrav digna yamtiv shenirikim eskaven. Lo malacha rabba, appears like he's engaged in this major delivery project, or perhaps he's transporting long distances. So keep things low-keyed, subdued, within the Yom Tov spirit. Continues the Mishnah. One may begin, he can initiate use of a never before used pile of hay. Now, although hay has several potential uses. Animal feed. It can be used as an ingredient in making bricks, like it did in Mitzrayim. Or finally, for hesek, for fuel, for firewood. This fellow would like to start using this hay, never before used. He'd like to use it for firewood on Yom Tov, to heat, to cook with. You can do that, even though it was not designated for this purpose. So lack of designation doesn't concern us. Aval, says the Mishnah, but he might not do the same with wood stored in the muktzah area. Muktzah is a term for an enclosed area meant for storage. That's why it's called muktzah. It's set aside for long-term use, for storage, whether it's a backyard, etc. You could begin using that wood supply on Yom Tov for firewood, despite the fact that it wasn't designated for this purpose. Now we seem to have a stira in the Mishnah. First we say, we're not concerned about lack of hachana. And here we say we are. The Gemara will dwell on this question. Says the Gemara, Tana, we learned in a Beitzah, although the Mishnah does advise us to deviate, to be meshane, when we transport things, so it doesn't give the appearance like it's a weekday type of activity. Tana, we learned in a Beitzah, however, there's no option of deviating. Rashi says he has lots of guests coming soon, he needs to transport a lot at a time. Okay, there's no feasible alternative. Go ahead and do it as per your need. Asking Rava b'Mechayta. Rava, who lived in the town of Mechayta, he established the following practice in his town. He meant to deviate, meant to be mishane when you carry on Yontif, whether it's to make things a bit easier, and that will reflect the Yom Tov spirit, or even if it doesn't actually ease the the loading process, but a shinui from derech chayil is in place. For instance, the daru beduk. There's some sort of load which generally he would put on his shoulder, bedeichak, with difficulty, carried on his shoulder. On Yom Tov, downgrade, employ a mode of carrying which actually makes it easier for you. Lidru beregla. That load should be carried on Yom Tov with a ragla, with some sort of pitchfork, Rashi says, which actually makes it easier to carry this load. So ease the degree of difficulty, which will demonstrate, which will reflect the Yom Tov spirit. Let's go over to Rashi, to the right. The Dora B'duchka, Maser she'adam yachad noisei al ksefai b'chayil b'tayrach. A maser, a load which generally one would carry on his shoulder with difficulty, on his shoulder, it's a bit hard. He would do that on Yom Tov. Don't stress yourself. In Balas Esasa b'Yom Tov l'tzorach Yom Tov kigon chaves esak malei peres yisenu b'Yom Tov b'ragla. Rather, use a ragla atar kind of furka kederke noisei melach limkar. So this furka is a pole with a double edge, which allows two loads to be carried at once. So this load, which you generally put on your shoulder, use this fork and hang it on the fork, which actually makes it easier, because that has a two load capacity. And this way, putting that one load on it will be a much easier carrying endeavor. When it deviates, when it makes some sort of change, try to do it in a way where it's easier, as opposed to making it more difficult. Va'atar zeh, says Rashi, this fork makes it easier to carry this heavy load. And this is because, and if he's going to use this to carry the single barrel which is generally placed on his shoulder, mishana lahaklu, it's actually a downgrade in degree of difficulty, l'kavod Yom Tov. That's one example, and he's going to proceed with a long list of different types of loads, and the point will be the same: change, deviate, l'tzarech l'kavod Yom Tov. Continues the Gemara. The Dora baragla. Suppose he's about to carry an even larger load, which is generally carried using this fork. What do you do now? Lidru ba'agra. He should carry it with an agra. Rashi says the agra is a pole. You have the load hanging off the middle, and two people will carry this pole by grabbing one side of the pole each. That's an easier mode of transport. If two people carrying a load which is generally carried by one person, that's a downgrade l'kavod Yom Tov. The Doru ba'agra, a real large load, a super large load which is generally carried using this pole. What should they do now? Lidru ba'akfa, make a slight shinui. So two people carrying this pole, instead of placing it on their shoulders, Lidru ba'akfa, Rashi says, they would carry it in front of them, holding the pole in front of them, which will show that it's different than the ordinary mode of carrying l'kavod Yom Tov. The Doru ba'akfa, something which is carried by way of holding in front of them. Suppose it's something delicate which needs special attention. So now what do? To demonstrate that it's Yom Tov, nifrois sudra eliyah. Okay, make some sort of heker, take a sudr, a material, and spread it over the barrel, over the load. So although he's not really making it any easier, but it's a shinoi which will demonstrate the fact that it's Yom Tov. If there's no such opportunity, no such option, doesn't have a material shari, go ahead and carry it in the normal fashion. Damar Maris, we just learned in the Beitzah. If you have no other option, go ahead. Amalei Rav Chanan bar Rav Ravash. Rabban. Although the Rabbanan did tell us that kama de efshel l'shanei mishanina, if there's any way to deviate, to be mishana, when you carry that load, which would reflect the Yom Tov spirit, you meant to do that. Mishanina b'yom tov, right? What about the following thing? V'ha'ani nashi. What about these women who just fill their barrels, draw water from the well without anyone protesting? The kamalyon chatzvayu, they fill up their buckets, maya, with water from the well, from the river, b'yom tov, on Yom Tov, without any deviation whatsoever. They do it the same way they do it during the week. And nobody complains. Why not? Amalei Ravashi responds, because they don't really have a feasible alternative. Heichi la'avid, what then should they do? When an Isha is accustomed to drawing with a large bucket, she should change to Mali b'chatz v'zuta? Should we tell her to start filling with a smaller bucket? L'kavod yomtiv? Well, kamafsha belucha. You are defeating the purpose because you're going to increase the walking, the effort. Instead of filling in less time using a large bucket, she's going to be using a smaller bucket, which will necessitate many more trips. So you're defeating the purpose. You're adding tircha, which certainly doesn't conform with simchas and kavod yomtiv. If an isha is accustomed to filling with a small container, should we advise her to start using a large one? She's going to be increasing her load and increasing tircha, which isn't really conforming to the Yom Tov spirit. Okay, maybe she should simply take a nachtma, a wooden lid, and cover the barrel, sort of to hide, to conceal the load, which will give it that Yom Tov effect. Well, Zimna de Nafel perhaps is a concern that the lid will drop down midway, it'll crack at the piece, and she'll go pick it up and bring it, in which case she's going to be over on muktzah, carrying these broken pieces of wood. Tiktere, perhaps she should simply tie it onto the container to avoid falling. Zimna de Mafsik, there's a concern that while she's filling and dealing with the bucket, the Mafsik, the lid would simply unravel and come apart. And she might retie the lid to the container and do a malach of tying on Yom Tov. That's not really an option. What about taking a sudar and covering the bucket with that material to conceal it a bit? L'kavod Yom Tov. Zimna de metamesh, there's a concern in this case that the material might drop into the bucket of water, absorb the water, and she'll come to squeeze the material, wring it out from its water, which is a malacha on Yom Tov. So you see, there isn't really a feasible option. There's really no alternative to what they do, so we leave it alone. Taisus asks, here we're concerned about the material getting wet and coming to schita, whereas in the Gemara earlier we said that Rava enacted in Mechayza that, for lack of a better option, they should take a sudar and cover the barrel. What about absorbing the liquid and getting squeezed out on Yom Tov? Stacy says there are two differences. Over there we're speaking about a chavis, a barrel, which is basically closed. It just has a narrow top, a narrow opening, very little chance that the material will fall in, as opposed to here we're speaking about a bucket, a pitcher, where the material might fall right through the opening, the wide opening. Another teretz, over there we're speaking about wine. Over here it's about water. Now what's the difference? So Taisus says doing schita off a material in Yom Tov can potentially involve two yisurim. One is melabin. You're washing out the material, and one is dash. You're extracting the liquid from within. It's like threshing the grain from its skin. Two separate concerns. So Taisus says, in the case of water, that's a true washing process. You're cleaning out the material, so squeezing the water out would constitute melabin. Not only that, there is dash as well, because you're extracting the liquid. As opposed to the wine, it says squeezing wine out of the material doesn't produce a melabin effect because the material is very dirty as is. Even after squeezing out the wine, it's still saturated, it's still dirtied from that wine. So there's no melabin taking place, and disha as well, because he says it's going li'ibud. It's getting lost. It's just dripping out, squeezing it out on the ground. So you're not really producing anything. You're not really extracting anything useful. So you're not getting involved in dash in that malacha, and that would apply to the water as well. There's no disha here because it's going li'ibud. The only concern is malabin. That only applies to water, where you're actually squeezing out and cleaning out the material, as opposed to the wine-saturated material where it remains dirty. So there's no concern in the previous Gemara. Amalei Rava bar Rav Chanan Labai. Tanan. Didn't we learn in the Mishnah that on Shabbos and Yom Tov you have to be careful from the following things? Aim at top, not meant to clap your hands. Rashi says, out of joy or sorrow. Ve'masapkin, nor tapping hands onto the leg. Ve'meragtin, or even dancing. The reason we're going to learn later in the Masechta is because perhaps out of excitement, he might go ahead and fine-tune an instrument to enhance the experience, which is certainly asur on Yom Tov or Shabbos, so refrain from these activities. But nowadays, we see many people engaging in these activities, nobody complains. Why not? Now, Tosfos actually points out that the concern being Shami Yisakin Kli Shir, he might fix the Shir, doesn't apply B'zman Hazeh. We're not really baki, we're not experts in fixing and tuning instruments. So he said B'zman Hazeh, there's no concern with dancing or clapping, and in Shulchan Aruch it's actually brought down to be Machim, but the Ramah seeks to explain why we see that many people don't hesitate to dance and etc. on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and it's based on this Tosfos because we're not baki to fix and repair and fine-tune instruments nowadays. In any case, we do have a Mishnah which seems to forbid, and everybody's ignoring it. Amalei, so Abai responds, well, according to your concern, what about the following thing I think that people don't really do properly? Hadam Rava. Don't we have a statement in the name of Rava? You have a mavi, an alleyway leading to Shas Rabbim. He says a person should not sit at the entranceway of the mavi, near the lechi, near the side post, holding a chayfetz. Why shouldn't he do that on Shabbos? Perhaps while he's sitting there, the chayfetz might roll away into the street, and be tempted to bring it back. He won't see the difference between the street and the mavi. They're both unroofed areas. He won't realize that there's Rosh Hashanah, there's Rosh Hashanah. So be careful. Refrain from sitting there with a chayfetz. And guess what? V'hani nashi, look at all these women, the shaklan chatzvayu, they bring out their jugs, v'azlam reyasvan, they go and they take a seat, apoma de mavoya, at the entranceway to the mavoy on Shabbos afternoon. They sit and they spend time there and they socialize with their drinks. Nobody says anything. Why not? Why isn't there a sound of protest heard? Ella, I'll tell you a secret. There's something called Hanach Lahem Yisrael. Leave Yisrael alone. In the case where you know that they won't listen to you, they're so accustomed to this type of thing, don't even bother reprimanding them. Hanach Lahem Yisrael, leave Yisrael alone. Mutav shu shaken. Allow them to just do it unknowingly, value mazidin, rather than prompting them to do it in spite. The point of giving techach is not to unload your grievances, to express your gripes, to soothe your conscience. The point is to benefit the recipient. If you know that he's not going to listen to you, so what's the point of telling him? Let him be. Let him do it b'shogig rather than transgressing b'isser. That's why we don't protest. We don't tell these women to refrain from sitting at the edge of the mavi. We know they won't listen in any case. Hachanami here as well when it comes to dancing on Shabbos. Hanachlam Yisrael, you know that they won't listen. Just leave them alone. Mutav sheyushegin, let them do it b'shogig value mazid, rather than doing in spite. V'hani believe the Rabbanan, says the Gemara. But this only applies to an Issa de Rabbanan. We have this allowance. But we know that they're doing an Issa D'Oraisa. We don't apply this leniency. We protest in any case. V'lo, he says the Gemara, actually it's not so. Lo yishna b'D'Oraisa, lo yishna b'D'Rabbanan, whether it's a D'Oraisa or D'Rabbanan, lo amrina lu v'lo mida. When we know they won't listen, we don't express any protest. Why? How do I know this? The din of adding some time to Yom Kippur, to be Mekabel Yom Kippur a little bit in advance of nightfall, that's a din D'Oraisa, that's a mitzvah say, and still, and what happens? We see women eating and drinking until the last minute. We don't protest apparently because we know they won't listen in any case. The Rosh has a chiddush on this Gemara. He says, if it's a din mefurish in the Torah, it's a pasuk, then this doesn't apply. It's only when it's a drasha, something which is not so clear, then we know, they won't listen. Whether we tell them or not, they're going to challenge. They're going to say, well, it's a minig, it's something we've been doing for years. What are you talking about? So we don't want to take that chance of arousing their ire and having them do it in spite. But when it's a pasuk in the Torah, just pull out a chomer and say, look, it's a pasuk. And then, in any case, you're chayav to be mechiach. Okay, so his shaila was, why don't we do anything regarding people who dance, etc. So he says, well, what about the women who sit by the mavi? We leave them alone. Mutav shu shagigin, and the same thing applies to Tzefas Yom Kippur. Continues the Gemara. Maschil maremas hateven. The Mishnah says you can approach a never before used pile of hay and start using it for fueling on Yom Tov, even though it wasn't set aside for this purpose. Amar Rav Kahana, Zoyser Meres, we learn from here, there's no concern of lack of designation. Maschilim bo'itzatchili can approach the oitza, the storage area, and use its content, despite the fact that it wasn't prepared, it wasn't reserved for Yom Tov use. Mani Rab Shimoni. Apparently, this is in line. This reflects Shitas Rab Shimon the Leslie Muktzah. He's not concerned with something which was not prepared in advance. As long as it's useful, it's functional, it is mutter for Yom Tov use. Ema Seifa. Let's proceed to the next part of the Mishnah, which says, you can't start using firewood from muktzah, from an unprepared area, from storage. Ason Rabbi Yehuda. This is Rabbi Yehuda speaking. The Islay muktzah. It's something unprepared is muktzah. So is it Rabbi Shimon or Rabbi Yehuda speaking in the Mishnah? You know what? It's Rabbi Shimon, but he agrees. When we're speaking about high quality wood, arzi v'ashruchi, different types of cedar, which is generally used for building purposes. The muktzah machmas chasar and kiss, it's muktzah on account of its high value. Nobody diverts that for firewood. Even Rabbi Shimon agrees it's off limit. It's out of bounds. He's not meant to be using these things for firewood. Even he agrees it's considered muktzah. Some apply to Rav Kahana's discussion on the next part of the Mishnah, starting from the second and making its way back to the beginning of the Mishnah. The Mishnah concludes, you can't begin using the eitzim sitting in the muktzah, which were not prepared for firewood use. Apparently, this is the shita that holds you can't start using stored material on Yom Tov unless it was reserved for Yom Tov use. Mani Rabbi Yehuda. Apparently, this reflects Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, the Islay Muktzah, who conforms to Muktzah. He holds that something not ready, not prepared for this type of use is considered Muktzah. Okay, a Moresha. Let's backtrack to the beginning of the Mishnah. Maschil maremas hateven. You can begin using a never before used pile of hay for fueling, for heating, even though it wasn't prepared for this purpose. Perhaps it's meant for animal feed. Perhaps it's meant for cement, for brick building. Asan Reb Shimon, apparently this is Reb Shimon speaking, the Lesley Muktzah. He's not concerned about something unprepared. As long as it's useful, as long as you can use it, no problem. You don't need hazmana. So who's speaking? Rabbi Yehuda Reb Shimon. Says the Gemara, Hasam Betav Nasaria. Certainly it's Rabbi Yehuda speaking, and therefore it doesn't allow you to start using wood from storage on Yom Tov. As far as hay, we're speaking about Tivna Saria, spoiled hay, which is unsuitable for animal feed, and therefore it is Muchanam and Zuman to be used as fuel. And it's not considered an unprepared and an unanticipated use. Tivna Saria, even spoiled hay, Chazalatina can use it for cement, for brick building. It has some thorns in there, and it's unsuitable for mixing and forming into cement. Apparently the only use that it has is for hesek, to be used as fuel, and therefore even Rabbi Yehuda agrees in this case. Okay, so you have two versions of Kahana. Mishnah says you can begin using hay, but not wood. It's either Rabbi Shimon speaking about high quality wood, which wasn't meant for firewood. It's totally off limits, out of bounds, off the table. You're not meant to use it for this purpose. Even according to Rabbi Shimon, it's considered muktzah. The point of Rabbi Shimon is that anything that I can use is not called muktzah. Anything which is within the realm of normalcy, I had my mind on it. I had my das on it. It's not considered dacha, it's not pushed away, not muktzah, but something which is high value and not meant to be used for this purpose at all. Certainly, it's considered muktzah even according to Rabbi Shimon. According to version 2 of the Gemara, the Mishnah reflects Shita's Rabbi Yehuda. That explains why you can't use stored wood for fueling, but unless it was prepared. But when it comes to hay, we're speaking about spoiled hay, which can only be used for this purpose, for fueling, and therefore is not considered unprepared and unreserved for this purpose. Says the Mishnah, so this fellow has a sukkah, not on sukkahs, a hut, which he happens to use on Pesach, on Shavuos. You cannot remove material from that sukkah. So you can't actually remove the schach, for instance, because you're demolishing a structure on Yom Tov. But minas samachla you can. Rashi explains samachla means you have a coverage, a thick coverage, a thick schach, so to speak, on your hut. So he's going to remove some of the top layer. That's okay, because you're not demolishing the structure. The hut is perfectly covered by way of the bottom layer. So you can take a bit off the top and use it for fuel, etc. on Yom Tov. Says more, what's the difference? I understand why you can't actually use the bottom layer, which provides coverage. That's considered demolishing the structure. That I understand. Because he's destroying the building. So what's the difference? Even the next layer, is destroying the structure. Why? Says Rashi on top. We're not speaking on Sukkah, it's going to Pesach, about Tzeres. V'yoshev Sukkah is sitting in this terrace, in this canopy, Bekina, part of this outdoors. Ein noitlin eitzim Sukkah, elam na samachla. Oh, that's the Mishnah. Explains Rashi. Hashta mashma. At this point, the Gemara figures, Imhu of, you have a thick layer of schach, shenosnu konem harbe. You piled on many reeds. Muta little bam, you can remove some of them, because you're not really interfering with the coverage. But the Gemara will ask, which we already learned, he's actually destroying the oil. So although it's not really vital, it's not necessary to have so much schach, but he was mevatlet. He formed it as part of the schach. He incorporated it into the coverage of the schach. Called porta de shalka. Any bit that's removed is considered seiser. So what's the difference between this layer and that? The fact is, he's demolishing a structure on Yom Tov. Continues the Gemara 4 lines from the top. Amar Bidamar Shmuel, you're right. My samach, when we say he's removing samach, it means samach letzfan. It's not from the schach, rather material situated near the wall. So you have the mat being used as a wall, and next to it you have some loose material there to thicken the wall. That you can remove because it's pretty clear, it's visible, it's not part of the wall, which is a solid material. Here's just loose material. That is mutter on Yom Tov. You're not demolishing any oil. From Malashi Amar, you know what? We're not even speaking about something near the walls. Rather, Ketanya when the Mishnah speaks about removing something from the sukkah in a permissible fashion, we're speaking be suraisa, bundles placed on the roof. So you have your loose schach sitting, then you have bundles of schach on top of that. It's pretty clear that it's not trying to be part of the schach. He didn't incorporate it into the schach, but he left it as a bundle. It's there to dry temporarily. He's going to remove it. So he was not mevatla to the schach, and therefore you can remove it on Yom Tov. Tanya Rav Chi bar Yosef came to Rav Yechon. Rav Chi bar Yosef presented a Beitzah to Rav Yechon as follows: Ein noitlen eitzim na sukkah elam na samachal. You can actually remove sukkah material, rather only something situated near the sukkah, as we just explained. For Rav Shimon Matir, listen to this. Rav Shimon allows you to remove actual sukkah material on Yom Tov. How could that be? The Gemara will ask soon. First, let's conclude the Beitzah. V'shaven, all agree. B'sukkah sa'chag b'chag she'asura. Even Rav Shimon agrees that if it's a sukkah on the Yom Tov of sukkahs, sukkah sa'chag b'chag, and it's actually now Yom Tov, even Rav Shimon agrees you can't partake, you can't divert sukkah material for personal use. And Rashi says even on Chol HaMoed, and the reason is because it has kedusha. So it's not your ordinary muktzah, which is muktzah machmas iser. It's inaccessible because you can't demolish a sukkah. Here it's more than that. It's kaddish, and it's not only limited to the Yom Tov aspect of sukkahs. Even Chol HaMoed, you can't divert sukkah material for personal use. So b'sukkahs achag, all agree it's us. Vim hisna leh. However, if he condition, he says, you know what? I'm building this hut on condition that I'm going to partake. I'm going to divert this material for personal use. No problem. Follow your condition. Okay, so that's the price. Let's go back. Rabbi Shimon Matir, Rabbi Shimon allows you to take material off for personal use on Yom Tov. So we're not speaking about the sukkah on sukkahs. We're going back to an ordinary hut. It's on Pesach. It's on Shavuos. Tanakama says you can take now samachal, but you can actually take the sukkah, the hut material itself, because you're demolishing a structure. Rav Shimon says you could. Rav Shimon matter because sasur oila, he's destroying an oil on Yom Tov. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, you're 100% right. We're not speaking about a structure that's still standing. What happened was this hut collapsed on Yom Tov. So you have building material strewn throughout your backyard. Says Reb Shimon, go ahead. Take some of that material for personal use. Although, during Ben HaShemoshes, coming into Yom Tov, this sukkah was off limits, it was inaccessible. You can't destroy an existing structure on Yom Tov. Reb Shimon is not concerned because he doesn't hold of muktzah. Even though it was not prepared for this type of use, it's okay once it's fallen apart. Go ahead and take that wood and use it as fuel. But Reb Shimon is in line with his shita to Leslie muktzah. He doesn't have this broad application of muktzah. He subscribes to very limited application of muktzah. If it's roi for use, it's not muktzah. In this case, you have a fallen apart sukkah. Go ahead and use it. The sanya, moiser hashemen, shebener shebekara aser. What about the leftover oil in these lamps on Shabbos? It's muktzah because coming into Shabbos, it was part of this burning lamp. In which case you can't partake from that oil. You can't remove oil when you have a burning flame. So even after the flame goes out, you can't use that oil for personal use. It's muktzah, because the muktzah status has already been established during Ben HaShemoshes. This is the shita of Tanakama. Rabbi Shimon Mater, he says, go ahead, take some of that oil, because there's no flame any longer. The oil is perfectly suitable, and the fact that it wasn't prepared for this purpose doesn't bother me. Likewise over here, you have a collapsed hut on Yom Tov. Go ahead and use the material for personal use. Midami, how do you compare two things? So in the case of a flame, it was anticipated, it was expected. Adam Yoshev Metzapa. A person will sit and look forward, so to speak, expect a Masai Tich Beneri. When is the lamp going to go out? He knows eventually the lamp will go out, and it's going to be, it was a derech, just the way they designed their lamps, to have some oil stuck on the bottom after the lamp gets extinguished. He knows, he expects it to happen. So in his mind, he's reserved that oil for personal use. So that's what Shimon says, it's not muktzah. As opposed to a hut, I sure hope he built it to last. Adam Yoshev Metzapa Imosai Tipo Sukkasei. Can you say that a person will sit and expect a sukkah to fall apart? Of course not. So how do you know that, according to Reb Shimon, you can use that material on Yom Tov? It was out of mind. He was Mesiach Das from this type of use. Amar Nachman bar Yitzchak, yeah, over here we're speaking about an expected development. Hacha b'sukkah ru'ua askina was speaking about a wobbly sukkah, which he know full and well. He expected it to fall apart. The me'esmol diet iloya, starting from yesterday, going into Yom Tov, he already expected sooner or later this hut's going to collapse. So he had his mind on it. And therefore, when it actually collapses, Reb Shimon says, go ahead and use the material for personal use. So that's when it's an ordinary hut, not a sukkah, not a mitzvah-related hut. So again, if it's standing intact, you can't demolish a structure. Only mina somachla, something next to the walls or next to the schach. But if the sukkah falls apart, here we have a machlekes. According to Tanakama, once it's been established as off limits during Ben HaShemoshes, because you can't access an existing hut, it's an oil. So that muktzah status remains throughout Yom Tov. Whereas Reb Shimon says, in this case where it was a wobbly hut, where he more or less expected this to happen, his mind was on it, he sort of mentally reserved it in advance. So this way, in this case we say when it falls apart, he can go ahead and access the material. Whereas if it's on Yom Tov of Sukkot, and this hut is now serving in a mitzvah capacity, all agree, the mitzvah status, the kedusha status applies itself to this hut during Ben HaShemoshes, which doesn't allow for using that sukkah throughout Yom Tov, even Chol HaMoed. V'shav and b'sukkah sachag b'chag she'asura, right? However, if he conditioned in advance, hakol v'itnoi, the condition, the t'nai, is effective, which allows him access to this sukkah, even on Yom Tov of Sukkahs. Again, suppose it fell apart, It was a wobbly sukkah which he expected to fall apart. He made it Tanai. I want to use it as soon as it falls apart. In this case, certainly you can do that. Says the Gemara, 1 second. You can make a Tanai on a Chayfetz Sham mitzvah? Umi mahani but Tanai, does a Tanai really work here? Is it an effective measure? V'amar of Sheshes. Mishum Rabbi Akiva. We learned, Menai in la'atzi sukkah sha'asurin kol shiva. From what do we know? That the sukkah material is also all throughout 7 days of sukkahs, even Chol HaMoed. There's a special kedusha that descends on that sukkah shel mitzvah. Shenemar chag sukkahs shiva siyamim Hashem. And we learned, V'tanya, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseir Omer, Menai shekashem shechal she'shemayim ala chagiga. Just as the Shem Shemayim, Hashem's name, Hashem's kedusha descends, applies itself to the carbon chagiga. It's a carbon which is kaddish. Kach chal Shem Shemayim ala sukkah. Likewise, the Shem Shemayim and the kedusha is applied to the sukkah itself, which prevents a person from misusing the sukkah material. Talmud loymar chag ha-sukkahs. Chag, that's the carbon. Chag ha-sukkahs. We connect the chag to the sukkah. Shiva siyamim Hashem, and we say ma chag Hashem. It's just as the carbon chagiga is reserved for Hashem. It's a carbon of sukkah Hashem. Likewise, the kedusha of Hashem is chal on the sukkah. You can't go ahead and divert that sukkah for personal use, and even a Tanai doesn't work. It's not up to you. It's not a kedusha. It's not an isra that you are generating. So when we're speaking about ordinary muktzah, which you set aside, you can make a Tanai. Look, I'm not relinquishing my rights. I'm still accessing. I'm still reserving it for future use. But when it comes to a sukkah shel mitzvah on the Yom Tov of sukkahs, that's not up to you. It's not a self-generated kedusha. That comes from Shemaim. You can't manipulate that. Says, well, you're right. Omer of Anashu Beit Rava Seifa. When we say that a Tanai works, Asar no sukkah di alma. It's referring to an ordinary sukkah, non-mitzvah sukkah, where the concern is simply because of muktzah machmas iser. The fact that it wasn't accessible ben hashmasha is due to the fact that it was a structure which cannot be demolished. Well, if he sees that it's a wobbly structure, like we said before, and he knows it's going to fall apart, he can say, look, I'm reserving it for future use. That works. Ava sukkah the mitzvah, but certainly if it's a mitzvah item like a sukkah on sukkahs, where it has kedusha, that's not up to you to manipulate and to arrange. Loi mahani but tana, a tanai won't be effective in this context. Really? With sukkah the mitzvah loi, when it's a mitzvah related item, you can't make it Tanai Vatani. We have a Beitzah which seems to say you can. We have a properly covered sukkah. V'itra, he added all sorts of decorations, bekramim, colored sheets, embroidered sheets, v'talabah goizim, he hung some nuts, shkedim almonds, afarsakim, peaches, brimoinim, pomegranates, parchilian novim, clusters of grapes, yenos, shmonim slasses, containers with wines, oils, and flowers, vatar shabom, crowns of stalks, osolis, tapik men, admotza, yom tov, achon shachak. All these become incorporated into the sukkah. They're serving the sukkah. They have the kedushas sukkah, and cannot be used, cannot be diverted for personal use until after the entire yom tov, motzah, yom tov, achon shachak, after the last day of yom tov. V'im hisnaleim. However, if he conditioned their use, he says, look, I'm hanging it up, but I want to still use them throughout sukkahs. Hakoil lifi tanai. His condition works. So apparently, even in a sukkah related concept, tanai is effective. Abaye v'Rava damar tavayu. Abaye v'Rava come to answer the kasha. No, it's different. It's very different over there. It wasn't just a condition. I'm hanging it up, but I still want to use them on sukkahs. That doesn't work. It's not up to you to manipulate. Rather, it's ba'omer. We're speaking that he expressed as follows: Eini boidel mehem kol ben hashmashes. He set forth a condition which prevented kedusha from descending at all. So it was never triggered to begin with. He says, I'm not separating from these items throughout the entire Ben Hashmashes coming into Yantav. The loichala kedusha alaya, in which case the kedusha never descends, never gets applied, because he's not relinquishing his rights, so to speak, and his accessibility to these items during Ben Hashmashes. He's not designating it for sukkah for mitzvah use at this point, in which case kedusha never arrives. So it remains in a non-kaddish status all throughout Yom Tov. Aval atzei sukkah, in contrast to this sukkah material itself, he can't manipulate that. He can't orchestrate a lack of kedusha. You know why? The chala kedusha alive, because the kedusha comes regardless. It's gatzoi l'shiva, and therefore it's muktzah for all 7 days. Why is it? So you'll ask, why is it different? Why can't he say the same thing? I'm not going to be boidel, I'm not separating, I'm not relinquishing my rights to the sukkah material all throughout Ben Hashmashes, to prevent kedusha from coming. So Rashi explains, it's very different. When it comes to decorations, you can say, look, I still want to have access during Ben Hashmashes. I'm not giving it away. Okay, so it never gets kedusha. But sukkah material, that's part of the oil. He can't access that during Ben Hashmashes, regardless of whether it's a sukkah shel mitzvah or an ordinary, mundane hut. You can't access the structure material. You can't demolish a structure during Ben Hashmashes. There's an isser of being seiser and oil. So you can't say, I'm not being beitel. You are being beitel. By default, you have to keep away from the structure. You can't demolish it during Ben Hashmashes. So once that happens, the kedusha arrives. If you have to relinquish accessibility, so kedusha comes. Kedusha only does not come when you say I'm being beitel, when I retain rights, I retain accessibility. But in the case where you don't have access because of whatever reason, because of the isser of being seiser oil, whatever the reason may be, so you're off, you're separated from the sukkah. Now it's a standalone sukkah, which draws kedusha, because it's sukkah shel mitzvah and sukkahs. It draws kedusha to it. In which case, once the kedusha arrives, it doesn't leave all throughout 7 days. So getting back to the Beitzah, sukkahs hachag b'chag is certainly muktzah according to all shittas. Even if it was a wobbly sukkah, which he expected to fall apart, and now he has a fallen apart sukkah, it's muktzah, because the kedusha that descended upon that sukkah ben hashmashes remains all throughout 7 days. When the Beitzah says a condition works, that's a sukkah de alma, a hut on Pesach, which doesn't have kedusha. So there, all agree, even Tanakama agrees, if he sees a wobbly structure falling apart, he can stand up and say, I'm going to use this as soon as it falls apart. And indeed, when it falls apart on Yom Tov, he can go over and divert it for personal use. But again, in the case of a sukkah on sukkahs, that remains kaddish all throughout 7 days. Says the Gemara, why do we say it lasts all throughout 7 days? Why is it different than the following halacha? Hefresh shiva esroigim l'shiva sayamim. So this fellow set aside 7 esroigim for sukkahs, 1 per day. Amarav, kol achas va'achas yoytzeba. So he takes the esrog on the first day, shakes it, does the mitzvah, v'oichel altar, and he can go and eat it right away, because the mitzvah designation was for mitzvah. He's done the mitzvah. It's no more muktzah. He can eat it. For Rabbi Asi Amar, kol achas va'achas yoytzeba, v'oichel l'machar. He takes the esrog on any given day, shakes it, but has to wait to eat it till tomorrow, because the muktzah status, the kedusha status, applies itself all throughout this zman, which is this day. It's been designated for today's mitzvah, so it's muktzah until the end of today. Wait until tomorrow. So it's a machlokes between Rav and Rav Asi. Up to what point do we say the esrog is still muktzah? Have to wait till tomorrow, or can you have it as soon as you've done the mitzvah? In any case, all seem to agree. At most, you have to wait a day, not 7. Why is it different than sukkahs, where it's muktzah for 7 days? Some the when it comes to shaking a lulav, where nights have a different status than days. Mitzvah lulav only applies to days, not to nights. So the nights sort of intervene, they interfere between the days. It's a non-mitzvah time zone. Kol chad v'chad yomas, therefore every single day separates from the next. Mitzvah b'nafshi is considered a separate zman mitzvah, in which case the muktzah status of today's esrog does not extend until tomorrow, because it was muktzah for today's mitzvah, not tomorrow's. As opposed to the sukkah, there's no difference between nights and days. The mitzvah of eating and sleeping in a sukkah extends all throughout days and nights of sukkahs, and therefore kulu yomi, all days and nights of sukkahs are considered kechada yoimar richtadami, like one continuous day, meaning it's one uninterrupted zman ha-mitzvah, in which case the kedusha, which generates the muktzah status, sticks until the end of your Yom Tov. Okay, so in conclusion, what about partaking from the material of your hut? So if it's a sukkah, a hut, which is actually still intact, still standing, so removing from the actual schach or the walls is certainly asur. It's a malacha of demolishing an oil. Taking from samach l'schach or samach l'tfanis is mutter. What about if the sukkah falls apart on Yom Tov? It was a wobbly sukkah which he anticipated, which he expected to end up in that condition. Rabbi Shimon says it's mutter to partake in that material because even though during Ben Hashmashis it was part of destruction off limits, we don't care. We don't apply muktzah to this extent. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, the fact is during Ben Hashmashis coming into Yom Tov, it was part of a structure and off limits, then muktzah gets established and sticks throughout the entire Yom Tov. All agree if you conditioned in advance, he says, I'm going to use this as soon as it falls apart, they can go ahead and use it. When it comes to a sukkah shel mitzvah on sukkahs, all agree that it's aser. So although it was a wobbly sukkah which fell apart, we don't care because the kedusha that descends upon this sukkah during Ben Hashmashis, whether or not he conditioning doesn't work, because as we explained, the kedusha arrives regardless. In which case we say the sukkah is off limits until the end of Yom Tov. Let's make a quick chazara on today's daf. We began the new parak with the Mishnah. A person should seek to arrange his mode of transporting on Yom Tov in a little bit of a different way than during the weekdays to keep with the Yom Tov spirit. We had a whole long list of specific directives in the name of Rava. We learned about the concept of mutav shiyu shegin vayu mazidin. We had two pshatim in our Mishnah regarding muktzah. We concluded, according to the first pshat, Rabbi Shimon agrees when it's something of high value, like high quality wood sitting in your storage, it wasn't meant for firewood and therefore it's considered muktzah. And we have the chiddush in Rabbi Yehuda that spoiled hay is certainly only meant for fueling and therefore is not muktzah for that use. And we concluded with various halachis of diverting sukkah material for personal use. Much hatzlacha to you and kol tov.